Take it away, Sam.
Thanks, Louise. Hi, folks. First of all, thank you to Chris and Louise for having me and asking me to do this. It's completely new for me. It's my first talk, so be gentle. I will share this, and if you can see it, say nothing. Cool. Okay. So Alpine JS. First of all, who am I? Well, my name's Sam. I've been doing this for since lockdown version 1. I'm a former camera engineer of 12 years. I worked in the film and television industry on TV shows, feature films, Game of Thrones for 10 years, Fast and Furious, The Witcher, Red Sparrow, DC Comics, all of this sort of stuff for 12 years until lockdown hit, and then no more work. So I decided to do what my wife was doing, who was sitting on the sofa with her laptop, earning the same money as she always did, but at the house. So I thought, that's for me.
Here, Sam, I'll jump in there. Actually, I think you're sharing your speaker view, not the slide deck view. If you share the different way.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
Let me try get rid of that. Is that any better?
That's it. Perfect there.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, so I was a former engineer for 12 years, and then I decided to go into this. I'm also a director of a company called Cinecopters. We fly drones for film and television. Again, do things for Red Bull, The Last Duel there, Netflix, AMC, Nissan, Jaguar, all of these bits and pieces. Do that on the side, but the real job now is development, coding. So I've been building things physically and digitally, mostly physically, for all my life, really. And then digitally has been more of, as I say, the last point when lockdown kicked in, I thought this is a good point to start learning something new. So I did. So one of the first things I actually built was a smart mirror. If anyone's ever seen a mirror that is also a mirror, but it's also a screen. So I built one of those with an old TV screen, ripped it apart, put a two-way mirror on top of it, and then a load of APIs to pull in Spotify, pull in the news, weather, time zones, etc., etc. So that was one of the first things I built, and it really got my appetite for actually what's possible. It was only touching the surface, but it was a good start. As I say, I'm self-taught, completely no real background in this, and during lockdown version 1, I decided, let's give it a go. So enough about me. What are we actually going to talk about? We're going to talk about Alpine JS. What is Alpine JS? Alpine JS defines itself as a lightweight JavaScript framework for composing behavior directly into your HTML. And essentially, what you can take away from that is, I would like to think of Alpine to JavaScript as Tailwind is to CSS. And anybody that, I'm sure everyone does, but anyone that doesn't know Tailwind, you basically write classes inside the HTML, which applies CSS to it, different from a outside style sheet, different from inline styles. I used to think that Tailwind was a bit long-winded and a bit messy, but the more you start to structure it and the more you work with it, it can be very, very handy, because like Alpine, you ship it off as one selective section or a div, and it's all there ready to go no matter where you put it. So here in Tailwind, you can see we have a class, a div, a wrapper div with a max width of 900 pixels. That's using Tailwind's new just-in-time mode, which is still in beta, but it works very well. Display flex, justify content center, items center, items align center, a border radius rounded, overflow hidden, a large shadow, margin on the x-axis of auto, and a margin on the y-axis of about 4 rem. Let's call it my8 is about 4 rem. So it works well, and as I say, you can ship that div anywhere you want within your file, and it all just works. You don't have to worry about nested classes or anything else. But why? What is the point? Why would you do this whenever everything works so far? Well, first of all, Alpine JS is tiny compared to, and I'm sure people will correct me on this, but compared to React's 34 kilobyte, views 33 kilobyte, jQuery's 31 kilobyte, Alpine comes in at a 6 kilobyte file size. And you can use that via CDN, which is the handiest way to do it, or you can do it with an npm install, but it's pretty much the smallest, most powerful thing that I've found so far anyway. So size obviously doesn't matter, but it kind of does. It's not that Alpine is trying to be something it's not. All it's trying to do is fill a void between vanilla JavaScript or jQuery that can be massive and can be cumbersome, and it's trying to fill that gap between those two and larger frameworks like React or Vue. It's perfect for whenever you need to ship small amounts of JavaScript for drop downs, for tabs, for accordion menus, for search filters, for anything like that, fully working inside this div, inside this section, and you know it's going to work because it's all contained in that. There's no need for additional JavaScript files or script tags or anything. Like Tailwind, it's all written inside your HTML. When would you use it? Well, this is an example of a something that I'm sure a lot of people here have written many times in the past, a simple drop-down menu. Maybe in a product sort of world, you would write this once and it's in your site or it's in your app and it's done. Probably more in an agency, whenever you have different websites, different clients that come in, they'll have the need for this, but you have to write it every single time unless you put it away as a component that works whenever you bring in this div. Include Alpine, bring the div, and you know that menu is going to work regardless of what it is, and then you can style it up in whatever way you see fit for that project. So what have we got? Again, we can see this order wrapping div with an X data attribute. And we basically, anytime we see X data, we're saying, right, that's an Alpine component. And we go, okay, right, you're an Alpine component. What are you called? Okay, we're open dropdown. And I'm sure everybody here, the easier the naming convention, the better, because in 15 minutes, I will have completely forgotten what that is called. And if I can call it what it does, even better. It'll make a lot more sense down the line. So open drop-down menu, or open drop-down is false, so it's not true. Whenever we go into our Alpine component here, we have a button, and we have our styles in Tailwind, and then we have a click. And that click is obviously an Alpine function, and does what it says in the tin. On click, open drop-down equals true. So, okay, we move further down. What happens when open dropdown equals true? We have our next div, which has xshow. And again, xshow does exactly what it says on the tin. On open dropdown being true, show this div. Very simple. We then have a click away, which open dropdown equals false, which hides our dropdown. Now that xcloak in between is quite handy. Xcloak will allows you to set xcloak hides the element until Alpine is fully loaded on the page. Although Alpine's small, it could still be one of the biggest things on your website or your page. So xcloak will hide all of your Alpine until it's fully loaded, so you don't have your menu popping up and then hiding itself once it's fully loaded. So xcloak's always a nice little attribute to add just to tidy things up at the end. Another example here would be a slightly more in-depth component. We have again an outer wrapping div and then our X data. So we have our Alpine element right off. We can see it there. Our X data. What are you? Text. Okay, so text equals an empty string. And we move further down, and our input, we have X modal or model. It's text. X modal and X text go hand in hand. X modal allows you to bind the value of an input to any Alpine data. So on our input, we're binding with X modal to text to our Alpine element. Then we move further down, and X text, because X text and X modal go hand in hand, X text is taking the text from the Alpine element and inputting it, which would look something like this. So again, any input can go into, you could use this for forms, it could be used for user interaction in any shape or form, but it's a very simple way of, and as you see, it's a very small way of getting data from the user's input into the page and into the HTML or wherever you want to put it. Another example here, and often the problem, certainly when you start out with Alpine, certainly when I started out with Alpine, was the nesting. We can see here again, going back a slide, that everything, once we have our X data defined, that's our Alpine element, and everything that happens is within inside that. But if you were to put that X text outside of the X data parent div, nothing would happen. It would break. You couldn't do it. There's a few ways to get around that, but one of the simpler ones that I'd like to use is this thing called dispatch. And the way I think of dispatch is pretty much dispatching it. So you send it off and it goes and looks for something else. So here we have two divs, both Alpine elements, both Alpine components, but they don't have a wrapping parent div. They're completely separate. So these could be as far apart as they like. This could be header and footer on a million page long website if it wanted to be. Our first div, we have X data, our title. Again, what are you? I'm a title. What are you called? The name's Bond. Then we go down to our second component. Again, X data, we're defined as an Alpine component. So on our button click, we dispatch. So as I say, the way I think of dispatch is it sends it off and it looks for the set title attribute somewhere else on the page. And as soon as it finds it, it can nest itself back in to an Alpine component and carry on as normal. So on our click, we dispatch set title with a event detail, James Bond. It goes off through the window, looking, searching. Oh, I've found set title in the window, and I can now nest myself back in here and work away as normal. So on click, our button can work. So that could be in a header and footer. And a recent one I used this for was a menu in the footer opening up a drop-down menu in the header nav. And without dispatch, as I say, there's a few ways of doing it, but dispatch is a very simple way of doing it. Assign it if you know the name of it, let it look for what it needs to find, and operate as normal. This is a slightly more in-depth example. Now it looks quite big, but if you actually get into it and look at what it says, it's really not too difficult at all, too complicated. This is using Alpine and Tailwind completely hand in hand. As I say, they're two Alpine JS. Alpine is to JavaScript as Tailwind is to CSS, and this is using both of them together. So again, we have our X data. We know we're an Alpine component. Is menu open? False. No. And our X show is menu open. So we know whenever is menu is true, we're going to see this div. So our transitions. X transition, again, at everything Alpine is started with an X dash. So this is Alpine transition. So X transition, enter. What are you going to do? I'm going to transition. I'm going to ease it in and out, and I'm going to do it in 0.3 of a second. Grand. How are you going to do it? I'm going to start. Transition, enter, start. I'm going to start at 0. I'm going to transform. I'm going to scale. And by the end of my transition, enter, end. I'm going to be at 100%, and I'm going to be at my full size. Great. What are you going to do when you leave? Well, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to transition. I'm going to ease it in and out, and I'm going to do it in 0.3 of a second. And then exactly the same. How are you going to do it when you leave, and how are you going to do it at the end of your leave? And it's really, really simple. Now, there's a lot to it, but again, the whole point of this is that you can ship these elements as one, and you can see exactly what they're doing. And this can be defined all within one outer wrapping div with everything there that you need to see. You don't have to go and look for what is this class doing, what is that class doing. It can all be within there, and it's pretty straightforward. This could start to look messy if you start to get the X transitions all in line, but if you lay it out properly from the word go, it starts to make your life an awful lot easier. We also bind classes. We can bind classes two true elements. So like in React, we start with the colon and class. So if it's open, give us a background blue 600 and a rounded corners. So if it's open and if it's true, give us that, which looks something like this, like this. And it can be lifted and laid anywhere it needs to be on that page, on another page, and all works within that one div. So as I say, this was a skim of Alpine. I'm still learning it. It's still relatively new to me, but I'm getting more and more familiar with it, and it's actually growing on me quite a lot. But to sum things up, is Alpine a replacement for Vue React? It's not. It's just not. Is it limited in what it can do? Yes, because it's so small. It doesn't try to do anything else. It doesn't try to be anything it's not. Is it for large scale projects or large scale components? It's not really. You could if you really wanted to, but it could start to get messy with nesting and just you're limited in what you have available to you in Alpine. So if you had a large scale project, large scale component, you're going to use React, you're going to use Vue. Is it handy for reusable JavaScript components, small ones like your drop downs, your accordions, filtered searches, etc., something that has JavaScript involved that is reused more and more throughout any website or anything else that you build? You find yourself building it many, many times. Is it handy? Yeah, it is. Is it small enough to include for one component, like 6 kilobytes? I mean, unless you're really, really stingy about it, yeah, it kind of is small enough to include for 1 or 2 components. Is it a great void filler between jQuery and vanilla JavaScript and React and Vue? It is. It can do more than JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript and jQuery with less code written, but it's not quite as in-depth or as complicated for not so much beginners, but anyone that is still working their way up through to learn Vue or React. It's still a great void filler for that. Can it do more than what I talked about? Absolutely, it can. There's many things that it can do. You can, well, yes, it can. There's all sorts of relations and elements and hides and shows and bindings and things like that. It can do the basics of what React and Vue can do in its own way, and it's quite powerful for the size of it. So that's it, folks. Thank you very much for listening, and hopefully it wasn't too, well, hopefully it was insightful in some shape or form. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't, maybe you'll go and have a look at it. But thank you very much. And if there's any questions, keep them to yourself. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Sam. Very, very interesting. I'd never seen Alpine before, but I can definitely see like the use cases and where it exists. Like something like that example, like it's such a lightweight framework. And to your point, like it's not there to replace React. So like I can always think of the example of like, you know, I'm building a blog and I need like, you know, an input form to do something. So I'm shipping a giant React application, you know, down the pipe to the user for like, and the rest of the page is static.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I think it's really cool. So we do have a couple of questions have come in.
Enjoy.
This is probably the most important one. Who's your favorite Spice Girl?
The other one. I still don't know which one it is. I can't remember.
And then on the more serious ones, yeah, so, is there a way to include like a chunk of HTML/Alpine code like inside of another? Like, say like you build a button, like kind of like components. If you think about like you build a button component, can you like then reuse that in other places of your Alpine code?
As like a partial, like included it as a partial.
Yeah, like kind of like say you, yeah, like a partial. Yeah, exactly, like a partial.
Yeah. You probably could, but for the size that the size of Alpine, unless it was completely identical, you might as well just do it again very, very quickly to have a slightly different. If you're going to reuse it, you're going to ship that same component again. If you're going to use something that's slightly different, you're almost as easy just to write it again. So you have it written again, but you probably could ship something within the Alpine. That could be a variable. It could be something that's accessed in a CMS. In fact, yes, you actually absolutely can access stuff within Alpine within a CMS. I've got a filtered search that takes in data from a CMS, which then allows the user to search as they type. So yes, you can put whatever you want within Alpine. But it kind of boils down to, are you going to reuse that exact same thing again? And if not, you might as well just write it again and have a separate component for it.
Yeah, I get the feeling like Alpine is very much like a single use to sprinkle a bit of interaction into an already like existing page or whatever.
Yeah, it's something that you would start with the bare bones. And if you start with a nav, I need a hamburger menu, I have an accordion menu, I have a drop down. Here's 3 of them. That is not going to take me an hour and a half to write. I can drop them all in and it can be working and functional in 15 minutes, if that. You still have JavaScript in there. It still looks nice. It still functions in a nice way with all your transitions rather than just a hide show. You still have it all there popped in, ready to go and refinable once you have it in.
Yeah, awesome. There's another one come through. So like it has its own kind of syntax with like the X dash and different kind of keywords. Is there like a learning curve to, starting to pick up what you need to use? Is it intuitive enough to kind of start getting running without having to read the docs too much?
Well, without having to read the docs, no. I mean, maybe some people, if you know Vue, if you know React, it'll be an awful lot easier. But in terms of the syntax of it, it's pretty straightforward. If you know Tailwind, it reads like Tailwind. It does what it says in the tin. X shows. The binding classes and the relationship classes and things like that are similar to Vue. From what I've seen of Vue, I'm still touching into Vue. But if you know Vue React, it's going to be straightforward, completely straightforward. If you don't know Vue React, then and you only know vanilla JavaScript or jQuery, it'll take a bit of time, but the syntax is straightforward enough that you're not going to go, what the hell is this? It's going to be pretty straightforward. And as I said, it's a void filler. It's the next step. If you don't have to, or don't want to, maybe you have to, but maybe you don't want to jump straight into React. Maybe you want to take a baby step and go into, right, what's next? How can I take the first layer of Vue React and look at it? And then maybe I'll know Vue React a bit better in a couple of months. That's what the syntax is very helpful for that, because it doesn't jump out at you as like, what the hell is this? It really is quite legible.
We've time here. Just one last question. So when you're showing that example about and you're doing the dispatch, have you ever run the cases where it can be confusing, where you're sending the dispatch to or where it came from, and how kind of managing those different paths?
Where you're sending it to is, yeah, because they're different, because they're completely separate. You really do have to keep on top of your naming conventions. I called that one set title. Set title is vague as anything, as we can imagine, but you can be as detailed as you want to be in there. No, it doesn't necessarily have to be. You can include that button. That could be a partial, and you could set it right beside your element that you're talking to. It doesn't necessarily have to be all the way at the bottom of the page, but it can be. As I say, there's more ways of doing this in Alpine rather than just dispatch. Dispatch is just the sort of simplest way of doing it if you know the names of things. If you have, again, a big site or a big component that you start to get lost in, might not be Alpine that you're looking for then to actually do this with. But as long as you set your naming conventions and you know set, rather than set title, it could be light and dark mode. Turn light and dark mode on and off. That could be, exactly where that is. But if you start to get into, is this that one? Is it this one? Is it the other one? It might not be the right Alpine way of doing it, or it might not be for Alpine at all. Alpine hits a ceiling at some point, and at some point you have to go, maybe we've hit the ceiling here and we need to go into something else a bit bigger.
Yeah, no, definitely, I definitely agree. Like I can already think of different use cases in my head where like just sprinkling a little bit of interactivity in there without having to pull in a giant framework and learn all the kind of capabilities of it. Thank you very much, Sam. It was an amazing talk.
Thank you.